and yet it's still very good. In fact, if the title made you upset, I'd say you should probably let me explain myself first. Because the point is, every game in this damn trilogy is good. But good in its own way, and I think that The Witcher 2 definitely has a lot of problems, to the point where it is most definitely the worst in the trilogy for me. I just finished 2 playthroughs, one for each path, and I have a bunch of things to talk about. So welcome to Paradoxa Gaming, and let's explore the good and the bad of The Witcher 2. Let's kick things off with some praises for the game. I greatly appreciate the important choices that The Witcher 2 offers. Especially the one between Jorvet and Roach, of course. I think it seriously makes The Witcher 2 a unique game with 2 almost completely different experiences, which is not something we see often, if ever. Not only that though, because I like getting to choose the Dragon's Fate as well, which is more difficult than could be anticipated when we consider the stance that Witchers usually would have when it comes to dragons. I also like having to choose between helping our friend in Lochmuin or instead going after Triss to try to save her from Nilfgaard. Not only are most of them difficult choices, they literally dictate the upcoming story, and they also make this game insanely replayable. One thing that makes this game a bit less replayable though is the lack of clear and meaningful hook for the story at times. Take for example the quest where we need to gather ingredients for Philippa, or a lot of the quests in Kedwen's military camp. To expand on that a bit, the quest for Philippa in Vergen is all about finding ingredients to save Saskia, a character that we barely know at that point in time. We're basically just given a list of groceries to complete for items that Philippa deemed worthy of our time. Turns out when you actually execute the tasks, they are interesting. For example, they can lead to spending good time between friends with some dwarves, witnessing weird dreams in a pretty unique concept, or even getting to see Roach again while trying to get Hanselt's blood. But still, I often found myself wondering if the quest objective itself was exciting, and it wasn't always the case. Additionally, my biggest gripe with the game is probably the combat. I never thought I'd say this, but I think it is less enjoyable for me than Witcher 1's combat. Why? Well, everything just feels clunky and unresponsive. For example, we can't cancel an attack with a roll, which is something, for example, that was possible in Witcher 3, but also the balance seems all over the place to me, with some encounters being way too easy, and some being nearly impossible. I lowered the difficulty pretty early on in the game because it was honestly just driving me crazy. I feel like most of the challenges that I was facing were, to put it simply, just not fun to overcome. On the contrary, I thought that Witcher 1's combat had a way more consistent experience in terms of difficulty, and it felt more balanced, but also the combat just felt more fair overall in Witcher 1. I did enjoy the build making options in the second game though. There are many layers of progressions like the skill points, mutagens, runes, potions, etc. A lot of these things are also present in Witcher 3, but overall I had a surprising amount of fun with my Igni build, and stacking a bunch of damage with signs did feel pretty impactful and rewarding. Walking around the maps also proved tedious, be it because of the multiple instances where we need to slowly climb or jump, or because of the pretty awful map and objective navigation. I found myself lost and looking for my way more often in The Witcher 2 than any other games I have played recently, and while it did get better over time, it's not because the game improved in any way, it's just because I learned how to avoid the traps, not because they weren't there anymore, unfortunately. Okay, switching topics, I really enjoyed how the game was filled with intense political situations, and it seems to be something that a lot of other players agree with. I think that the way in which CDPR managed to create such intensity and chaos is worthy of praise, but I've also found the dialogue and writing to be very inconsistent throughout the game. So let's look at a couple of examples right away. Let's take this one for example, between Geralt and Leto, and they obviously start to fight each other, and I want you to look at this clip. Look at how humiliating Geralt's performance actually is. Now let's listen to what Leto has to say about it.
I see you still know how to fight.
Yeah. Or maybe a better example, in the prologue we jump between sequences in the present and in the past, as we are in the process of retelling the events of what happened the day of Foltest's death to Roach. Well, in the past vision, we can see Roach learning about the Scoia'tael's presence and involvement.
I saw Scoia'tael on the river.
Where? How many? What colors did they wear?
When we go back to the present, at some point he acts as if he just learned about their involvement.
Scoia'tael. This puzzle is beginning to come together, Geralt.
It just doesn't make sense. I'll stop with the examples, but the game was filled with moments like these to the point where I'd say it's a clear weakness, which I guess saddens me because at times, especially during the important moments of the game, I thought that the writing could be pretty good as well, so it was just very inconsistent. And as I said, before moving on, I want to talk about this again, but I thought that the overall story direction was pretty damn good, and they do handle politics almost flawlessly. Moving on, I want to talk about how a couple of things were off-putting at times in the game, which basically made the whole experience feel a bit different from the other titles in the trilogy. For example, the Cairn, the blood-cursed battlefield between Kedwen and Edirn, the dragon, the Drog. It feels like the game is trying to be grandiose or epic, but The Witcher rarely actually is that grandiose. In the same vein, I thought that the overall atmosphere of the game differed significantly from its successor and also its predecessor, mostly because of its almost constant tension and almost stressful nature. I must say that it does fit the nature of the game with the multiple twists and very fast pace, but I do wish that more peaceful and melodious and just atmospheric moments such as that one would have been a bit more frequent in the game.
They weren't even given the chance to die in combat.
You also lost your king, Vernon. Don't forget why you embarked on this mission.
I haven't. If Letho and Sheila are in Loch Muin, they'll never leave it alive.
It's probably a good opportunity to mention that I think that the soundtrack, in my opinion, is the least consistent in the trilogy, unfortunately, but it also has some of the very best tracks. Blue Mountains, Dwarven Stone Upon Dwarven Stone, A Nearly Peaceful Place, and A Quiet Corner are definitely some standouts for me. Alright, now let's talk about the visuals of this game, which I really enjoyed. I think it looks great for its age, and it's a clear step ahead of Witcher 1 in terms of graphical quality, though I do find Witcher 1 to have better art direction in general. While I think that the towns were designed beautifully in Witcher 2, they were definitely a bit frustrating to navigate. I thought Loch Muin, Vergen, Flotsam, and Kedwen's military camp all had distinctive identities and will all remain quite memorable for me for various reasons, but I enjoyed the fact that the offering and variety in terms of design was so wide in this game when it comes to the towns. But outside of the cities and towns, I was a bit disappointed by most of the landscapes, which in my opinion, frankly, just paled in comparison to what Witcher 1 and Witcher 3 managed to achieve, and they just somewhat lacked complexity and care almost. That's what it felt like to me. I'd say it's definitely an area of the game that felt rushed. I can't help but feel that the game could have benefited from more resources being put into it in some areas, but with all of the branching choices and the other things that the game is doing well, maybe that was the price that we needed to pay. Okay, next topic on the list is the fact that the voice acting can be insanely repetitive. Like, I have rarely seen it to that extent in a game. I heard the voices of Foltest, Roach, Zoltan, and Henselt so many times, and of course it can be a bit immersion breaking, though I would probably agree that it is an issue that most people would probably consider to be a bit less important. It is a common issue in big RPGs, and it's even present in Witcher 3 for example as well, but I think that it was definitely repetitive enough to deserve a mention in this video. So, The Witcher 2 is a very strong game that's mostly enjoyable for me thanks to its characters, multiple difficult choices, the great story and political situations, satisfying character progression, and really just insane replayability. On the other hand, most things related to the art, as well as some of the story hooks, are fine, but can be downsides depending on the part of the game that you're in, while the writing, limited resources in certain places, as well as most gameplay related things are all things that were often just straight up holding the game back in my opinion. We're left with what I think is a flawed but still great experience. From a narrative perspective, it was definitely compelling with many memorable moments, which we will obviously talk about as it is now time to quickly talk about each chapters, their highlights, and my overall thoughts on each of them. Right before though, I should probably mention that this video is definitely shorter than it probably should be because I already made 4 videos on The Witcher 2 prior to this one on the channel, including 3 videos that were each dedicated to a specific portion of the game, including the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2. I was yet to do chapter 3, so they will all be linked in the description if you're interested in watching them. So let's address the prologue quickly again in this video. I think that the prologue is godly. It's non-stop, meaningful action that's still plagued by average writing, but it's really one of its only flaws. The characters are gripping, and it's an amazing introduction to the game. The overall narrative arc is very strong, and it includes the death of Foltest, of course, which is one of the best storytelling moments in the entire trilogy, in my opinion. Chapter 1 is really where a lot of the flaws become a bit more apparent for me. The combat becomes more frustrating. The forest areas are all similar and repetitive, navigation is frustrating, and the quest objectives become less relevant at times. Despite the flaws, I still enjoyed the difficult choice between Jorvet and Roach, of course, but also the tensions between the non-humans and the humans in Flotsam were interesting to explore, as well as the threat that Loredo and his motives pose. My closing thoughts on Chapter 1 are that I still think it's a very good chapter overall. Chapter 2 is going to differ a lot depending on your path, and it ranges in my opinion from pretty mid to very good. I think that the Kedwini camp in Roach's Path is probably the area where I had the least amount of fun in the entire game. It wasn't bad per se, but I was definitely bored at times, especially by all of the fetch quests. I thought that visually it was interesting, and being in a military camp like that was definitely interesting, so the location itself wasn't the issue. In Vergen though, while, like I said earlier, on the surface the quest objectives could look like more fetch quests, I thought they ended up being more interesting than the ones in Roach's Path, and I thought that Jorvet's Path was a more varied experience overall, with also characters that were frankly more interesting. To me, Saskia, Philippa, Stennis, Yarpen, and even silly situations like the troll couple all had their interesting moments and didn't feel like a chore to complete, quite the contrary in fact. I should probably also mention that the music is top tier in Vergen, which I really appreciated as well. Chapter 3 brings everything to an intense closure with the summit. Once again, I think that Roach's Path is the least interesting, unfortunately, but it also makes sense. Since we picked Roach, we end up investigating Anais and Boosie's situation and basically who's behind the attack on their caravans. While with Jorvet, it's all about Philippa and trying to make sure that Saskia's vision remains unchanged following the discovery that Philippa is pretty much controlling her 100%. Though I will say that in both my playthroughs I decided to help Triss instead of continuing with Roach or Jorvet, so I have no knowledge about how those story arcs evolve past that at all. The future of the North is then discussed at the summit, with so many difficult issues to discuss and people with different motives, be it Temeria's weak position, Radovid's will to remain strong, Cadwin's greed and search for power, or the Lodge's plans. It all obviously leads to a clash that concludes beautifully all of the intrigues of the rest of the game and answers a lot of questions. Sheila's situation with the Megascope is a great moment as well, and it leads to a pretty difficult choice. Let me know in the comments, I'm curious. Did you fix the Megascope for Sheila, or did you let her quite literally blow up?
Something's not right. The diamond! Someone replace the diamond! This one's flawed, I'll be torn to bits! Geralt, remove it! No! No!
Following the Sheila situation, we then fight the possessed Saskia, aka the dragon. It's pretty epic, but honestly I kind of ate most of the boss fights in this game, and since I ended up not really caring about the combat in the game overall, it's just not what I was playing the game for at that point. Although, I will say again that getting to choose the dragon's fate is something that I thought was absolutely interesting. I'm pretty sure that my preferred option is to keep her alive. While it's true that the dragon could pose a huge threat if Philippa's spell cannot be overturned, Saskia was an amazing character in this game, one with great values based on what we got to see from her, and as Geralt says,
Triss, please understand. The last thing I want to do is slaughter one of the most beautiful creatures I've ever seen. Saskia is good incarnate. She's the exact antithesis of Eilhart and your former friends. They should be punished.
Finally, there's the meeting with Leto. Frankly, I think I might make a separate video for that eventually, but I think that choosing Leto's fate is a great complex choice because there are many layers to it and there are so many different angles with which we can approach the situation that it is bound to lead to controversy and spark deep discussions between fans. I still need to look at all of the evidence again to really solidify my position on this matter, but so far, I lean slightly on the side of killing Leto, but again, I'll probably dedicate more time to it and make another video for that in particular later. So that concludes my discussion on the chapters. I think that it's worth pointing out that I consider Yorvit's path to be significantly more enjoyable than Roach's. Vergen was my favorite location in the game, but also the characters present were much more interesting, so it's not very close for me. But let me know in the comments, which path do you prefer, because I wonder how many of you actually prefer Roach's path. If it's the case for you, please let me know why as well. The Witcher 2 left a strong impression on me, but my time with it was definitely more complicated than with the other Witcher games. I didn't think initially that it would even be possible for me to say that I preferred Witcher 1's combat, and yet, here we are. Still, I'm very happy that we have 3 strong games in the trilogy though, and I must say that I'd be very excited for a remake of this game actually, because I do feel like the gameplay systems are an area where a lot of improvements could be done, but also the writing could be improved easily to fix at least the major outliers. Thank you so much for watching, I hope that you had a good time, and if you want to see more content like this and things like a video dedicated to the Leto choice, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That'll be it for today, thanks again, and I'll be back soon with more videos. Bye bye.